All right. Thank you so much. I'm Christine Cather with the Princeton Review. I'm excited to be here today to talk about some resources that we have, as well as share some information. With this group, I understand that there will be many of you watching the recording later. Sydney, are you able to confirm, do I have any black boxes covering any parts of the deck that seem important?
There's a little bit of the QR code covered, but it's just the top left corner.
Okay, how about now?
That's good.
Okay. So, if you are watching this live or if you're going to be watching it in the recording, if you don't mind scanning this QR code and filling in this information, in that way, I'll be able to share a PDF of this deck, as well as links to an SAT practice test that you can do at home, as well as an ACT practice test that you can do at home. So, Sydney, super fast before I start diving in, when I logged into the Zoom, it had something about California, about California. Is this targeted specifically for California, or are these students from across the country?
These will be students across the country.
Okay, good to know. There are certain things with being in California. I know there are certain other considerations too with the UC system. So I will talk generally, but if you are in California, you have other considerations and factors as well. We won't deep dive for the rest of the country, but we can always connect afterwards. So here we go. We're going to be talking about the SAT, the ACT, or both, and how it actually fits into the landscape of your college application. Please note that in the past, there was a lot of weight given to the SAT or the ACT along with the GPA, but it is not the end all be all. So just note that we want to make sure you're keeping the exam and these scores in context. And schools are really looking at that holistic review, who you are as a person, your activities, your experiences, what impact you're making in your communities already, and if that's a good fit for the school in terms of their mission and vision statement. And what you are doing in your application is you are collecting a body of evidence to show that you are ready to handle the academic rigor of whatever school you're interested in, as well as showing that you have certain interests that would be a good fit for that school in terms of matching that mission statement. And then also that you have shown evidence that what you are doing now is a great indicator of what you will be contributing in the future. So again, placing the exams in perspective, I know students can get very stressed out about the GPAs and the exam scores. It is just a piece of the puzzle, but it can open more doors and it can afford you more opportunities in terms of getting additional funding. So just wanted to place the SAT or ACT in perspective before we dive in. So with the Princeton Review, student success is at the heart of everything we do. Better grades, better test scores, better applications. So today we're going to be talking about the SAT, ACT, or both. We'll talk about a couple of truths as well as misconceptions. We'll talk about the similarities and differences. We'll talk about little things that you can do to improve your score, but also know that through our partnership with Service to School, you do have an opportunity to take advantage of some test prep discount codes if you're interested in one of our courses. So starting with some truths and misconceptions. The SAT and the ACT serve the exact same purpose. So they are college admissions exams. It's another piece of that application puzzle. And especially starting in 2020, post-COVID or during COVID, the SAT and the ACT exam have taken different weights depending on the programs that you're interested in. So in terms of what has happened in recent years is many schools have gone in a variety of ways. Whereas it used to be required at most programs, many programs are now making the exams test optional. For California, I was asking in the beginning, if you're in California, you're probably familiar with the UC system and the UC system being test blind. There are programs, however, when they say test optional, it can mean test optional for a specific set of students who have attained a certain GPA. And so as you are looking at which schools you'll be applying to, I highly suggest you start organizing a spreadsheet for yourself. So on that spreadsheet, start with that first column where you have the program name, and then add an extra column for the average GPA. Add an extra column with the average test score, whether that is an SAT or ACT. And another column, add if that test is optional, required, or blind. And let's keep going with the columns since you're organizing this already. And it is important to really know what these schools that you're interested in are requiring so you are ready. In that column after you look into whether the school is test optional, test blind, or if it's required, look at the specifics. There are so many students who have the misconception that they'll see test optional and they'll think, okay, great, I don't have to take this exam. But when you look at the fine print, many schools have it as test optional if you have attained a certain GPA. So I don't want you to be fooled into thinking, hey, test optional is across the board. For many schools, even if it says tests optional, take a look at the fine print. It could be perhaps it is test optional if you have above a 3.3 or whatever it is for that school. But below that, they may need to see an SAT or ACT. And in addition to that, they may need to see a writing sample if you take the ACT. So small things to be aware of early on can help you be less stressed as you are in the months of trying to get that application completed. So just know what it is that you're up against so that you are fully prepared for your specific situation because it will vary program by program. Sticking with the spreadsheet for a little bit more. Beyond the fine print of whether an exam is required, test optional, or test blind, start looking into how many letters of recommendation they would like to see and if those are required or optional. Just again, so you are fully prepared. And then take it a step further. And while you're in the website already, why don't you go ahead and add in the mission and vision of that program? Because that could come into play when you are writing your personal statement or those supplemental essays. Another caveat as you are doing perhaps the Common App, where you are able to apply to multiple schools within one application. Keep in mind that when you take the SAT or the ACT, if you know which schools you're applying to as you're taking the exam, you can enter some schools to send your scores to automatically. If you don't do that, that's okay too. In the Common App, then you can then indicate which, or you will get a better sense of which schools are asking for the exams, or you'll by then know which schools you want to send your scores to, and then you can send them afterwards, but there will be typically a fee per school to send your scores to. So just getting an overview of the application and the different pieces and how the exam actually fits in. So as we move on from here, we'll get into some other details. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at the Best 390 Colleges, it's a book that our editor-in-chief, Rob Vranick, puts together. And it gives certain lists based on student feedback. So as you are putting together your school list, you can use this as a resource. The Best 390 Colleges, I'll share a link from it to our website as well. So you can get a sense outside of just the GPA and the test scores as to some other things that the students think is really important when they're making their decisions. And perhaps you can learn more about different programs that you may not have initially even considered. So in terms of how many programs are actually requiring an exam, about 7% of the schools are requiring, about 2% of the schools are test flexible. Test optional is where the majority of programs now live. So about 84% of the schools are test optional, but as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that may not mean test optional for everybody. And I just don't want you to be surprised if you are one of those students that's just slightly below that GPA threshold where you're thinking, hey, I didn't even set aside time to get ready for this exam because I thought it was completely optional. Just know beforehand, do your research now so that you know if a program you're interested in has test optional or if it's required, where you fall within that threshold so that you can do some proper planning and really be prepared for the exam. And then we have students who do meet that threshold. So for those students who do meet the threshold for the test optional and the exam really is test optional, then they start asking us, well, should I take the exam? And then if I take it, should I go ahead and send my scores? There are so many different opportunities for you to get some funding by simply taking one of the exams and turning in your score. I've seen many schools that will give out some charts, and they'll have certain charts regarding this is the financial consideration you can get if your GPA is XXXX. And then another layer to that is they'll say, if your GPA is XXXX and you have an SAT or ACT score of XXXX, then this is the amount of funding that we can provide to you to help pay for that schooling. So by submitting a test score, you can open up more opportunities for yourself in terms of potential financial consideration that will maybe help sway you in terms of which school you end up truly at. And then also don't feel like you have to have a perfect score to even submit it. Schools like to see the effort that you're putting in, and it just allows them to put you into the range for financial consideration as well. So just be open-minded, pay attention, particular attention to test optional and what the fine details of that means. Take one of the practice SAT or ACT exams that we can send your way and go from there in terms of then making sure that the rest of your application is as complete as possible, because that holistic review in 2024 truly is that holistic review. People's acceptances are not based solely on GPAs and the test scores anymore. They really want to get that whole picture of who you are and how you're describing your activities, what you've done in the community, your leadership, your service, your involvement. All of that is important as well. So just think about the whole landscape, where you can fit in, where it can be a win-win situation where your genuine interests align with that program. And then hopefully that SAT or that ACT score can keep more doors open for you and can attribute to some financial compensation there as well. And then about 7% of the schools are test free. So with the UC system, they are currently test blind. So if you are applying to one of the UC schools, the AP exams can come into play a lot more. You, in addition to the test prep discounts you get for SAT or ACT, you also get the Princeton Review discounts for AP scores. So not just for test blind at the UCs, however, all programs, those AP scores, the strength of your courses, how you're challenging yourself, the grade trends, all of that will come to play when they're looking at the academic criteria and your total package. All right. So 93% of all schools will want to see a high test score if students submit them, and 96% of those schools with a less than 25% chance of acceptance rate, they want to see those high scores. But don't be afraid to turn in a score that is still in a great range, given the average scores that you then put into your spreadsheet. There are so many students who could have gotten more financial aid had they just submitted that score. So don't shy away from it just because your score isn't in the top percentiles. Okay, how optional is test optional? By the time you apply, the current policies at your target schools may change. So you really need to stay on top of it, stay apprised of the situation, do your research, and keep updating that spreadsheet so you have the most up-to-date information, because it has been changing over the last couple of months even. So keep that spreadsheet, but do your research and stay on top of whether or not a school is then requiring it, because more schools more recently have been implementing the test required back into their application process. And you should choose to submit scores on that case by case basis. Again, but don't be afraid if your score is not perfect. Don't think because it's not this amount that I shouldn't turn it in. I think I've explained, I beat the dead horse that turn in a strong score and that could help you academically in terms of academic money to supplement for that tuition cost. And talk to your advisors with Service to School. From my understanding, they have a great team there that can help you talk through options. And on your campuses, many of your campuses have great advisors who are there. They have their jobs to help you, and they work with so many students who are in very similar situations. So take the time to take advantage of the resources that you have right in front of you that are available. And I promise you that just by starting that conversation, you will get so much more out of it than even just the answer to your initial question. When you start connecting with these people, a lot of times they can mentor you in so many different ways. So my call to you is for you to make an appointment with an advisor or a mentor through Service to School and start those conversations, not just about, hey, should I turn in a score, but what are some other things I can do to enhance my application? Or, hey, I'm describing my activity in this way. Does that resonate with you? When you're describing your activities, it is important to not just say the thing that you have done, but it's really important to articulate the impact and the growth, the transformational nature of whatever that experience is. So many students in their heads, they're thinking, okay, on the activity section specifically, like I'm just going to write exactly what I did. But so many other students have had a similar experience. The differentiator lies in your growth, your impact, that transformational nature. And so with the test score, again, can be that difference maker. If a school is test optional and you opt to take that score and you do okay, that again could be another differentiator for you. So you still want to take the SAT or ACT, even if you don't submit your scores. So you have the opportunity to submit them. If you never take the exam, you will never know what could have been. So our suggestion is to take a practice test. From there, you decide the SAT or the ACT, which one highlights your strengths better. And then from there, take one of the exams. Typically, students will take it twice. So after you take it the first time, make sure you're scheduling it with enough time to address some of your weaknesses so that you can take it again. And then from there, you can super score if the school allows you to super score, which means that they will take the highest score from one section and pair it with a different exam administration for the other section. So the super score can be a great way for you to make your score even higher. So again, don't put yourself in a hole by not even attempting the exam. Just give it a go. Start with a practice test, register for an exam. In your mind, know that it's typical to take it twice. So plan for that accordingly so that you have the best chance of really submitting the highest score possible. Okay. And the SAT and the ACT are not like the tests you normally take in your high school classes. So the high school tests, it's a very specific subject matter. The content is really relegated to what you've studied chapter by chapter. Typically with your high school exams, you have plenty of time to complete the exam in your class. Many times the teachers will give you partial credit for some of your answers, and it's one element of your overall grade. Whereas with these standardized tests, with the SAT or the ACT, it is many years of material that become fair game. And there are test strategies that you can implement so that you can work through the questions more efficiently and effectively. With these sections, timing becomes an issue. So practicing that timing is so important. Oftentimes students focus so much on just reviewing content, But that is not the end of the story. You really have to be able to uh, review the content, but learn how to apply that into SAT or ACT style questions. And then another layer to that is doing that in a timed environment. So taking those full length practice tests is such an important way for you to start building up that stamina and that mental focus so that throughout the exam, you can stay as focused and sharp as possible. And you can start implementing some of the test taking strategies that hopefully you've prepared for and you've built up through your preparation time. One thing on these standardized tests is a lot of times there are trap answers as well. So partial answers can lead to trap answers. For example, if you are reading a passage, they can start pulling in words into answers that are directly taken from the passage, but they have nothing to do with the question at hand. So practicing avoiding those traps is also a piece of that prep. So you have the content, the strategy, and working with the timing. And then with the SAT or ACT, only your final score matters. But because you can take it again, and because many programs do allow that super scoring, you do have the advantage of being able to combine to make that best score possible. So again, just knowing what your programs are open to doing can give you a truer sense of what you need to be doing to position yourself best to be a competitive applicant at that program. Okay, so other myths we're going to bust here. Some colleges only accept one of these, meaning they'll only take the SAT or they'll only take the SAT. Most programs in this day and age will take either, and they have a scaled score so that they can make that equivalent. It will not matter if you take the SAT or the ACT. And then another myth is that some colleges prefer one over the other. So that is a total myth as well. Because the exams do differ, again, taking that practice test will just give you a baseline and a starting point. So you know from your own strengths and your own weaknesses, which exam will highlight your strengths and which one will help get you further with a little bit of prep. Okay, so the biggest myth about the ACT and the SAT, what's a good score? Everyone needs to know what is a good score. And there is no one good score for every program because it will vary and it depends on your other pieces of the application as well. Looking at the average scores, however, as you pulled into those average scores you pulled into your spreadsheet will give you that good baseline or starting point, and it's the score that gets you in. So with SAT scoring, you're going to see a scale of 400 to 1600, and it's comprised of summing the section scores between your reading and writing and then your math. So each of those sections can then go up to 800, which then combines for that 1600 score. With the SAT, depending on the difficulty, the scores will have varying weights. With the ACT scoring, you'll see a different scale. The scale is going to be 1 to 36. And then you can see with these different sections with English, math, reading, and science, you will see that that can go up to 36. And they're averaged then for a composite. There are some changes happening soon, though, when we see the science. However, after you take your practice test, you get a better sense of which score highlights your strengths better, but also think about your application as a whole. When you're applying, you are painting a picture, painting a portrait of who you are currently as a student and how and where you're going to fit into that school and how you're going to be contributing to that program. So if you are a STEM major, or if you're thinking of becoming a STEM major, this science section here and scoring well on that science, coupled with some activities, perhaps you're able to do an internship with a physical therapist, or perhaps you have done other things like you were part of the science clubs on campus. Having a strong science score here with the ACT can help complete that picture, whereas the science section is not on the SAT. So There are small things that you can do to help you determine which test is best for you. But again, there is no one size fits all. It depends on your specific situation and how you can highlight your strengths and how you can tell your story and paint that complete picture of who you are, and paint that picture in a cohesive way so that if someone picks up your file, they can quickly and easily take away 4 or 5 key points from any part of review of your application, whether that's a test score, your APs, your GPA, some activities you were involved in. Perhaps it's something out of a letter. Perhaps it's something compelling out of your personal statement or out of your supplemental essays. Make it very easy for the person on the other end to have a clear picture of who you are so that if it comes down to them having to advocate for you, they have lots of arrows in their quiver, if that's the right terminology. My husband is into, oh my gosh, archery right now. And so he's been making his own arrows and fletching and such. But you want to have as many arrows in that quiver as possible so that no matter what they're looking at, they can find ways to really advocate for you. All right. And the questions on the ACT all have equal weight, whereas on the SAT, it can vary on the weight. With the ACT, there is the optional essay, and that's scored separately on a scale of 2 to 12. When I mentioned earlier on about the test optional, and I said pay particular attention because it may not be test optional if your GPA is below that certain threshold, the optional essay may also not be optional if you are below a certain threshold, depending on the program. So again, it's just good to know upfront by doing that spreadsheet for yourself of the schools you're interested in and their requirements so that you are not stuck behind an 8 ball thinking, hey, it's completely optional. Well, it might be optional for your friend, but it might not be optional for you. And that essay might not be optional for you. So knowing what you're up against will just help you feel confident that you have done everything possible to put your best foot forward in your application. All right. So now I would love for you to take a guess if you can add into the chat. And you may be seeing a box because now I have the chat open. If you can guess what the average SAT and the average ACT scores are, and you can put any number in here. So take a guess as to what the average SAT and the average ACT scores are. And you see my box moving because I'm taking a look at the chat, moving the chat box. All right, we have a guest of 1050 SAT and 21 ACT. So let's see here. Very, very close. So the average, the 50th percentile, 1020 for the SAT, and the ACT is a 19. And then for the 60th percentile, you can see that that goes up to 1120 and then a 22 on the ACT. And then for those very top scores, as I've mentioned before, the top score for an SAT is 1600 and a top score for the ACT is 36. And then that 98th percentile, you can see there's just not as much movement there. So if you start off average or below average with just a little bit of preparation and knowing a few tricks and actually practicing full-length exams so you just know how the questions are asked, you can improve your scores. Give yourself the best possible chance by taking full-length practice tests, addressing some of your weaknesses, and really giving this some time because despite it seeming optional, a certain score in combination with a certain GPA can give you some more financial considerations that may change the school that you end up selecting. So open more doors by taking the SAT and the ACT and then submitting those scores. If you're able to take it twice, that super score may come into play and may be really helpful and maybe the thing that admissions committee member may be needing. So if there are students who have very similar backgrounds, experiences, and GPAs, Someone who submits a score, they just have one more arrow in that quiver, and one more thing that that admissions committee member can use in order to advocate for that student. So, all right. Okay, a good score is a score that gets you accepted. And although that is not a what's a great SAT or ACT score, it's not the perfect answer. It is the answer. It is the score that gets you accepted. And it differs per student and it differs per program. So having a good idea again of what it is that you are interested in can create that best win-win situation if you have programs that are at your target level in terms of GPA, test score, and hopefully your mission and vision aligns. Then you can start applying to schools that are also above that, and then schools that are below that. We used to have students say, hey, I'm going to have this many safety schools. Sadly, we really can't use that term anymore because it is challenging to get into many different programs. And oftentimes you might be confused as you might not see the rhyme or the reason behind acceptances and rejections. So just do everything possible to make your package as strong as possible. And don't be limited just by those average GPAs and test scores, but they can be a guide for you in terms of setting your goals. But you can always apply to schools whose averages are above that. My own son, his averages were below many of the schools he applied to, but his total package really told that complete story that got him accepted into schools that he was surprised by. So don't sell yourself short, but give yourself every opportunity to highlight your strengths, and that exam, even if it's not perfect, can be that extra boost that will give an admissions committee confidence in saying yes. So with ACT versus SAT, although there have been many changes over the last couple of months, there are certain things that have stayed the same. So they're both scaled exams. They're both tightly timed. They both test English, grammar, reading comprehension, and math. They both allow calculators. With the SAT Blue Book, you will have the Desmos calculator, which I think is part of our practice exam as well. So that's a great way to start testing that. They do not penalize for wrong answers. They're both taken at a testing site and proctored in person. So what is different? The SAT currently is a digital test, and the ACT can be taken on paper or on a computer. If you take the practice exams with the ACT, oftentimes if you're taking it in school, then if you're taking it in school, then you will be getting that paper version. Some students do better with paper, some students do better digitally. So that's why it is extremely important to practice the way you will be taking it. If you are not used to taking exams strictly on a computer, you may not be used to toggling the screens. You may not be used to the different tools you'll have with the highlights and the strike throughs and such. So even small things like practicing the tools at your disposal, practicing with the Desmos calculator, all those small things can save you time and make you more comfortable as you work your way through the exam. Another thing, the way you organize your scratch paper. As crazy as it sounds, organized scratch paper can help you save time as well, because through the notes that you're taking, say you are skipping certain questions, if your scratch paper is organized, then you can jump more quickly back into the questions that you've at least started, refer back to your notes, and then hopefully narrow down quicker so that you can save some time and attack more questions. SAT math problems are generally a little bit longer. The SAT has the built-in Desmos calculator. ACT tests a few more math concepts and more plain geometry. The verbal sections will have different formats, and the ACT has the science section. The SAT currently is shorter, but stay tuned, because as one exam tends to change, we'll typically see the other exam changing as well. So for right now, section by section, I don't need to read this verbatim, but you can get a sense of how the SAT differs from the ACT section by section. One big difference with the ACT is it is now computer adaptive. So it's computer adaptive by section. So what this means is in your first module, you will get a mix of difficulty. So you'll have some easy, some medium, some hard. Depending on how you do on that first section, if you perform well in your second module, the questions you'll be receiving will be more difficult overall. If you didn't do as well on that first section, the computer adapts and the algorithm will feed you questions that are less difficult. However, as I mentioned before, on the SAT, the questions are weighted. So from there, depending on the level of difficulty of your questions, it will then translate into your overall score. So we don't want you sitting there trying to guess the level of difficulty, if your scores are way more or not, if your scores, if it's even a question that you are getting scored on. Like by the time you sit for the exam, you should be attacking each and every question as diligently as possible without trying to guess like, hey, where do I fall? Don't waste your mental energy trying to figure out if you are getting more difficult or easier questions. By the time you're sitting, you've done enough practice and you just need to stay focused, stay mentally focused and sharp on the question at hand. You should only be focusing on the questions that you are given. And really that discipline comes from doing consistent practice tests and training your mind to really stay focused on the task at hand so that you can move again efficiently and effectively through those questions. As I mentioned with the exams, they are changing. So the SAT just went through their major overhaul with the computer adaptive nature being administered online and making their exam shorter. So the ACT is also changing. If you are in the class of 2025, then nothing changes for you. But if you are in the class of 2026 or below, the ACT will be shorter. So it's going to go from about 3 hours to about 2 hours. So an hour of test taking is significant. So hopefully it will help you stay sharper and more focused. The science test will become optional. However, if you are a STEM major, remember you are trying to paint that compelling portrait of who you are overall. So if you are saying that you're interested in the sciences, yet you take the ACT and you ought not to take the science section, just keep in mind the full story that you are telling. The English reading and math test will have fewer questions, which again helps contribute to that 2-hour ACT versus the 3-hour. And then it will be offered in both online and paper and pencil formats. This becomes important depending on how you do with an online test administration. Some students just naturally like flipping through on that paper, and it's easier for them to flip back and forth through questions. But with enough practice, then you will learn how to toggle back and forth on the computer so that that becomes comfortable too. But again, it takes practice. So give yourself enough time to practice so that you can become comfortable with the tools. Because again, it is not just the content that becomes a challenge on these exams. It is the application of that content into the questions. It is avoiding those trap answers. It's working against the time and then also battling your own stress and stamina. So lots of different pieces come together. So it is important to feel as prepared as possible by practicing as much as possible. Instead of just reviewing concepts, you need to be applying those concepts weekly leading up to the actual exam so that you are prepared in every way, from content to strategy to timing to fatigue. The scoring, however, scoring range on the ACT is remaining the same despite the time change. All right, so as we said, the ACT will be shorter. It goes from about 3 hours to about 2 hours. The ACT and the SAT have kind of been in this, Coke versus Pepsi war for a long time. So when the ACT went shorter, or when the SAT went shorter, the ACT then followed suit. So they have not released the official timing, but typically they have tended to fall in line. On the ACT, the science test is looking to become optional, but again, if you're a STEM major, tell that whole complete picture of who you are. So you may be seeing different options, many different options, if you are taking the ACT. So you have the ACT, you have the ACT plus writing, which although it doesn't sound fun to do the additional essay, it may be required given that GPA threshold I talked about in the beginning, depending on the schools you're interested in. So know what the rule is so that you can then be ready for it. ACT plus science, because as we said, the science may become optional, but depending on your situation, that science could be a big plus for you. And again, another arrow in your quiver. And then you have the option of the ACT plus science and writing. My son is not the most academic. Because he didn't meet that GPA threshold, whereas for his friends, the exams were optional. For him, the writing was not optional. So again, knowing that can help you then make sure that you are taking the exam in the way that you need to be taking it so that you are able to submit your scores. All right. So these asterisks, the asterisk is stay tuned because ACT is still giving out details. I was just at the NACAC and with Sydney and Annie, and there are still some questions. So just be on the lookout because more clarification is still coming out about the ACT changes. English reading math test will have fewer questions. We'll see the new structure in its official format soon. They'll both be offered online and paper pencil. Let's see. What else? Scoring remains the same. Okay, this. Okay. Again, the scoring, that 1 to 36 will remain the same. College admissions offices can use scores in the exact same way that they always have, despite the changes. Currently, it's an average of all 4 sections: English, math, reading, and science. So students who are stronger in English, math, and reading may find that they can now build stronger composite scores. So implementation timeline. No changes to the paper and pencil ACT through July of 2025. The online, the computer-based changes come in April of 2025. But for those of you who are taking it during the school days, whether or not it's paper or online, the changes won't take place until September 2025. Okay, can I take a shorter ACT with no science section this school year? For the paper-based test, no. If you take it online outside of your school's administration, then in April 2025, yes. And then registration for the new ACT opens in December, so stay tuned for that. So improving your scores. All right. So follow your own personal order of difficulty. What that means is you have the option of attacking the questions in the order that best suits you. And that's where organizing that scratch paper, say you start a question, you skip some, and now you're trying to come back to those other ones that you started. Having organized notes on your scratch paper can help you with the timing so that you can try to attack more questions because you can dive right back into your notes, pick up where you left off, start eliminating some of those other answers, and then keep going from there. So this is just an example of a couple of different questions. These are not actual questions, but if you're looking at these questions overall and you have a choice of which one to do first, I would love just to have you take a quick peek and in the chat, let me know which one would you personally do first if you had the choice. And when I see the note in the chat, okay, now, because I don't want to block out too much. Yes, yes. most students would do that same selection, Joshua, 20 divided by 5. So that personal order of difficulty, this is just a small sample. When you are going through your section, attack the questions that you know you can get done quickly first, and you'll be able to come back to those ones that may take up more time. So try to attack the ones that you have a higher likelihood of getting correct first. Go through those, and then you can come back through. And then from there, you are working through some of the more challenging ones, or even guessing, depending on how much time you have left. With that issue of time, that is why it is important to do as many practice tests leading up to the actual exam. So you start getting a sense of how you personally will move through these questions. Practicing your personal attack of the order of difficulty can get you more comfortable. So the day of the exam, you already have your approach. And having an approach in this exam can help keep your stress level maintained at a certain level, because you've been there, you've done that, you know how the questions are laid out, you know your approach to this, you know you're going to attack the questions that are easiest for you. You're going to keep your scratch paper organized, and then you're going to go back and you're going to attack the remaining questions, or at least give it a good guess, so that you're not leaving questions on the table blank. All right. Oh my gosh. And I'm just having a little brain fart here. What time did we start this, and how much time do we have left?
We started slightly after 4 Mountain Time, so 3 o'clock your time.
Got it.
And we booked for an hour. So if we go slightly over 4 Pacific time.
Okay. Okay. You know what? You are all going to get a copy of this deck. Oh, if you fill in that QR code and links to the practice test. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I will say that as you are looking at this blank, you can take a quick peek at some of the answers just to get a sense of what type of answer they're looking for. And from there, I'm going to point out just one of the traps is they are looking to trap you with the movements of the northern polar jet stream blank, important for airlines. So many of you might fall into the trap of northern polar jet stream being singular, whereas the verb is actually referring back to movements, which is plural. So just small things like that you can start really picking up on the more practice you do, will just help you move through these a lot more quickly, because oftentimes then you will save time, because you're not going to have to read the extraneous sentences. You can really focus on what answer they're getting to, and so you can maximize your time and make yourself as efficient as possible, so that you're not wasting time on questions that don't need all of that time, and you can move through them. So again, movements is what we're really trying to focus on. With movements, the correct tense is are. And again, that just takes practice so that you can move through these questions quickly. So math strategy, I'm gonna fast forward through these so that you can maybe try to do a few of these on your own, because it's always good to have a sense of how you perform. And the best thing about the free practice test that we will give you access to is that you get a score report. So before I dive into that score report, these are the upcoming SAT dates. These are the upcoming ACT dates. Make sure you look at the deadlines to register, because if you are past a certain deadline, there are extra late fees that are implemented, and oftentimes then the locations that are closest to you may get filled up. So pay attention to these test dates. I'm going to put the QR code again here. So the QR code will lead to information that you can opt into, so that you can get a copy of this deck, as well as a link to a free SAT practice test, as well as a free ACT practice test. What I was saying was that if you take the practice test, one of the best parts is that you will get a personalized student score report. So what that means is, after you take the exam, you go back into your Princeton review portal. not only will it give you your score, but you can deep dive in and see question by question, topic by topic, which questions you got right, which questions you got wrong. It will give you areas of opportunity. It will group your subjects by topic so you can see where you could be spending your time and making more of an impact to raise that score. Um, it will also give explanations to the answers. Simply by reading through the answers in this free practice test, you can improve your score because you're going to start seeing and understanding the reasoning behind why certain answers are right and why certain answers are wrong. So even that simple review in that free resource can help gain you more points as you are getting ready to take the real thing. So that is a QR code. These are standardized tests. They are coachable. They are beatable. Will it take some effort? Yes. Will college take some effort? Yes. Will an application take some effort? Yes. But will it be worth it? Yes. So it is up to you. What you put into anything is what you'll get out of it. So just put in some effort and know that we are here to support through some test prep discount codes, through some free resources. If you ever want to talk through some of the options that we have available, we have the 888 number here, so you can talk to an advisor, but we have lots of free tools in addition to some of our paid courses, and that practice test with that student score report and that self-analysis is one of the best free tools. And then we also have, I can see if I can get a code for, we have a new AI essay feedback tool. So for your essay exam, what is great, I know AI is a hot topic right now. What is great about our AI essay review, and again, I'll make a note to myself to give you a 30-day free trial, is it does not create or write content for you. What it will do is it will act as an advisor and give you questions that you can ask yourself so that you can add more depth to certain sections of your exam. So we've trained it to act as an advisor, so it will not cross any ethical lines in terms of creating that content. It's going to take what you've written and then ask you further questions in areas in which they see room for improvement. So I will, at NACAC, where I saw Sydney and Annie, we were giving people access to a 30-day free trial. So I will get that code as well for you guys. If you opt in here, so I'll have your information. I'll follow up with the deck. I'll follow up with a link to the SAT, a link to the ACT, as well as a link to a 30-day free trial for our AI essay review. With that, I'm going to stop sharing. The time flew by. So Sydney, my apologies again for that, the glitch in trying to get in the first place. But I'm happy that we were able to talk through. I know it's a lot of information, and if I went too quickly through anything, they can always reach out and email or talk to one of our advisors that we have through the 888 or 800 number for the Princeton Review.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for, sharing the information, all of the free resources. I know we have, like I said, a handful of students that weren't able to make it. Just most of our students are still working full time, on active duty. So I will make sure that we get the information and the resources out to them. But I know, like I told you at NACAC, we have 6-ish partner schools that are going back to requiring the exam, and 2 more next year have already said they're updating their policies for next year. So I know we have students that will absolutely be taking advantage of the free resources and looking to improve their scores, like Josh, who we've been working with in one of our groups. So Josh, thanks for being here. Josh, is there any questions that you have? You can either drop them in the chat, or if not, you have Christine's email from the deck. But
Just to absolutely ask, and before I say anything else, thank you for your service, and thank you all for all that you guys do for each of us. That service is an amazing part of who you are, and the essays and and the activities and just painting that complete picture of who you are. It says so much about you. So again, thank you from me as well as everybody, but really lean into that and take advantage of the resources that you have through Service to School, as well as on your campuses.
Josh, do you want to drop your question in the chat? Oh yeah, here we go.
Oh, now I see. Okay. So is the SAT or ACT easier to improve on quickly? For example, if I scored a 1200 on the SAT and it's equivalent on the ACT, which could I improve on best? You know, what's funny is similar to undergraduate students, if they have the option to take the GRE and the GMAT, although it's very similar in terms of the math section and then the verbal, students tend to do better based on the way the question is asked. So I think, Josh, once you take a practice SAT and then take a practice ACT, you will find that you gravitate more towards one or the other, and it's going to become clearer once you actually take both. And then if the science, is science a factor with your major at all or your background? Okay, that's interesting. The problem I had with the ACT was that the wording was strange, but the ACT time limit was too harsh. And you know what? With the time limits, though, I think you can make improvements with the time, the more you practice. And when you start really knowing what the question is asking, then you can start skipping over to the superfluous parts where you're like, hey, that's a trap. They're trying to suck up my time by having me read these 3 extra sentences, when in that one verbal example, all you really needed was the words right around that blank. So learning and practicing little ways to save time can help improve your overall score. And then I see that, no, you're not in the sciences, but you did do well on science, which is great, because a lot of that, again, is just pulling out some of the readings and then that critical analysis, the critical analysis and reasoning skills came into play. So if you did do well in the science, that shows another piece of your academic readiness and the rigor that you can face despite the major. So I love that you did well in the science despite not having that as that background. I feel like, given what you've said, that the timing on the ACT, if that is the issue, learning the tricks to help you get faster may be a good path for you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it is so individual. Like, you can talk to 10 different students and there are 10 different ways and reasons why one is better for them than the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, Josh, thanks for joining us. And for everyone else, we will get the recording out to you all here shortly. But Christine, thank you so much for the partnership, supporting our student population, and also for being here this afternoon. So we will be in touch shortly and look forward to some of those resources. I'm mostly interested in that AI option, so I might ping you for just a beta test or something.
Absolutely. 30-day free trial for you and all of your students, even for the graduate programs. Try it out.
Yeah, wonderful.
It is the ethical way to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Our staff was just talking about AI and essays earlier. So definitely, as you saw at NACAC too, a hot topic, but
it was hot. I will share that code and you can share it with everybody that you know.
Great. Thank you so much again. This was wonderful. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.